Hey, what's going on everyone, Nick here and welcome back to the channel. So with this video I'm going to be giving my first impressions and overall thoughts on the first two episodes of Alien Earth, what I liked about the show, what I don't like about the show, what could be improved, and just general things like that. I don't want to get too in-depth about like a whole recap of what happened in the episodes, so there are going to be a lot of spoilers here because I'm just going to be basically giving my thoughts on what we had given to us in these first two episodes. Right off the bat, I want to say that the casting is really good for this show. I was a little bit skeptical when I saw some of the trailers, and when we started to hear more about the character details, that the show was going to be following essentially a group of terminally ill children get their consciousness transferred into android synthetic bodies. I thought that was, a really interesting setup, but it was going to really depend on the casting and the performances of the characters, and so far they have nailed it. I think the standouts obviously are Sydney Chandler and Timothy Oliphant, who play Wendy and Kirsch. Kirsch is like the android sort of mentor to these lost boys, as they're called. There's a lot of Peter Pan and Neverland imagery in the show. The first episode is called Neverland, and I believe that the island or secret sort of laboratory station where the children were operated on is also called Neverland, the island of Neverland. So really good setup with that. A lot of really interesting characters. Wendy and her brother have a really interesting dynamic too that I'm sure is going to be explored as we progress through the season. Another thing I like about the show is that the crew of the Maginot, the ship that crash lands into the Prodigy City, it's a Weyland-Yutani vessel, and it feels very much at home with the crew of the Nostromo. The characters all feel sort of like they're truckers, space truckers. The world feels lived in. You can tell that the series and the overall aesthetic of the show really harkens back to the original film, while also pulling some elements from the second movie, James Cameron's Aliens. The Maginot crew is pretty interesting. I hope that we learn some more about them. Right now as it stands, it looks like a lot of them are just sort of cannon fodder as the xenomorph wreaks havoc on the ship and causes it to crash land into Earth. But the character of Morrow, who is the security officer, he is able to escape, and he's also a cyborg, so he's got a lot of interesting dimensions to him. He seems to be holding a lot of secrets behind, so curious to see how that character develops as well. And the other thing that we heard a lot about the show going into it was the fact that there were going to be other alien specimens, not just the xenomorph, and that's, I think, one of the highlights of the show as well. So far we got these leech boil type aliens, we got this little octopus eyeball alien that takes over your eyeballs, so really unique and terrifying in their own way, but also still not really taking away from the limelight of the xenomorph itself. It feels like it kind of just coexists quite well alongside the original alien. Now, this is where I wanted to talk about one of my complaints, or I guess nitpicks, with the show so far. I feel like the handling of the xenomorph that we've been introduced to, the one that caused the ship to crash land and the one that wreaks havoc in episode 2, doesn't really feel like the big chap or even the warrior aliens that we saw in the second movie. It reminds me a lot of the runner alien, actually, from Alien 3. It behaves a lot like the runner, where it's just very aggressive, wanting to just ram into anything in its path and tear it apart like an animal. It doesn't really feel like the calculating big chap alien from the original film, or even like the ones from Alien Isolation. Those ones had sort of elements of that kind of heat-seeking missile type creature that would just like lock onto something and just run at them, but also very cunning and stealth-like and really calculating. I feel like so far they haven't really done that too much with this alien. There was a couple points where it was kind of hiding in the shadows. I like the shot a lot where it was blending into the statue and trying to camouflage itself along with the statue, and then it picked the guy up with its inner mouth. That was really cool. But overall, I don't know. I was kind of let down by this initial appearance of the alien, and hopefully we get some more discoveries or some more exploration as to why it was so animalistic and feral like in the second episode. Maybe it was birthed from an animal, and that's why it's, you know, acting in this very animalistic way. The other thing that I think is not so great that they could improve upon is the fact that it is, a lot of the shots, a practical guy in a suit, which is great. I like that a lot. It really goes back to that original, you know, aesthetic of the first two movies. However, I think that they could improve upon the suit and the overall look of it. I think it's a little bit too clean looking, a little too rubbery, plasticky looking in some of the shots. I think that, you know, touching it up, dressing it up with more liquid look or more of a distraught look could make it look more like how the big chap looked in the original film. I just think it looks too clean and too like pristine or something. I don't know how to explain it really, but I just think it could look grimier and grungier and just more lived in and more like a biomechanical being. Another thing I like about the show, though, is that it's really exploring the corporate aspects of the alien universe and getting more perspective of the different companies that now govern the Earth. It is a bit different than the setup in the expanded universe, but I'm hopeful that we could possibly see a reference to the United Americas and the three-world empire eventually in the show. Now, the first two episodes overall do a great job at building the world and introducing the narrative of this research ship holding lots of secrets, which may help us understand eventually why Weyland-Yutani seemingly knew more than they let on in the first two movies, and why the Nostromo was rerouted to LV-426. So overall, I have really high hopes for the rest of the season. Definitely want to see more from this world and this version of Alien, because this is definitely Alien through the eyes of Noah Hawley. And it's interesting that it's very faithful to the first two movies, but it's not using any of the mythology so far from the prequel movies, Prometheus and Covenant. It seems like Noah is going back to the roots and the idea that the xenomorph is this ancient, mystical sort of creature that was discovered in the cosmos. So I like that idea. You know, I like that we can have sort of different approaches and different interpretations of the Alien canon within these live action versions. But leave your thoughts down in the comments below. I really enjoyed the show. I can't wait to be watching it every week when it comes out. Did you guys like the first two episodes? What do you guys think of the characters, the sort of setting, the aesthetic to the show? Do you think it's faithful and exists within the world that Ridley Scott created in the first movie? What do you think of the xenomorph? Like, I was, you know, complaining about the aesthetic of it and the sort of approach to it being very animalistic and not like the calculating, cold stealth creature that we saw in the original first two movies. Those were just some nitpicks that I had, but overall, really great show. Definitely one of the better shows that I've seen on streaming in a while. Just can't wait to see more from it. So if you guys are new to the channel and you like this video, subscribe and hit the bell so you can be notified whenever I drop new content. If you want to hit me up on social media to talk about Alien Earth or anything really, you can find me in the links down below. And with all that being said, I will catch you guys next time.